Great. Well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Eric Baker. I'm the Deputy County Administrator for Kitsap County. I have worked for the county for 32 years. Big chunk of that was with the Department of Community Development, but the last 16 have been working directly for the Board of County Commissioners. So I have 3 bosses. And I have seen a number of commissioners over time and have worked on pretty much every comprehensive plan except for the 2016 one since 1994. So I am the repository of most historic information on how we got from the adoption of the Growth Management Act to where we stand today, for better or worse. So yeah, I born and raised in South Kitsap, graduate of South Kitsap High School in 1988, and graduate of the University of Puget Sound. Very happy to be here. So let me see if I can share my screen. It looks like I can. All right, a second. There we go. So yeah, I'm here to talk about the comprehensive plan update. This is due in 2024. I know it is 2022, so it feels kind of early to be having these conversations, yet a comprehensive plan takes many years to actually go from start to finish. And there are key decisions that are made along the way that grossly affect future decisions. So while it does feel like we're a couple years out, there are going to be decisions the board is going to have to make in 2023, and more importantly, conversations we're going to be having with the public here in 2022 and have been throughout the summer and will continue through the fall. That's important for people to know about, for people to come out to, and the people to participate in. I guess my question is, usually because this presentation is long and there's a number of sections to it, is it okay if I pause at particular times to have people ask questions at that point so they don't have to wait all the way to the end? Or is that?
Absolutely. Just
okay.
Whatever you feel is best.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so why is the comprehensive plan important? Basically, it is a countywide document that affects unincorporated Kitsap County. Each of the cities have their own comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan should be consistent with the other city plans, but again, our planning does not directly affect residents within the city of Bremerton, Bainbridge, Poulsbo, or Port Orchard. The key aspects is it is mainly intended to direct growth. People are moving to Kitsap County, and we are responsible for planning for a 20-year planning horizon. So for this effort, we're looking from 2024 to 2044. We need to make sure that there's adequate infrastructure. We need to make sure we're protecting the environment as growth comes. We need to ensure that there's adequate housing choices. And then there's many other aspects, which I'll go into here in a moment. This does not include tribal lands. Obviously, the tribe are sovereign entities and their reservations and their lands are theirs to govern. And our comprehensive plan does not have an impact on that. It is required by state statute that we update this plan. Previously, it was every 8 years, but recent state statute indicates that now it's extended to every 10 years. So what's in the Growth Management Act? This was adopted back in 1990. In many ways, it was modeled after the Oregon version, which is different in a lot of ways. Basically, what the Growth Management Act indicates is that local jurisdictions must plan for 14 goals in mind, and we have to balance these. So you can see the list here. I won't go through all of them, but you can definitely take a look and see certain of these goals may not necessarily work well in tandem. Matter of fact, some people perceive that they are actually working against one another in certain instances. Historically, our efforts to promote urban growth and reduce rural sprawl has come to loggerheads with property rights. Some of our protections of the environment, some folks have indicated have affected the price of housing. So obviously when we're balancing these, we need to make sure that we're finding the sweet spot in between all of these, because again, these are not prioritized. The state does not say what of these is most important to your community. It is local discretion. And that local discretion is local discretion as determined by the Growth Management Hearings Board, which is the entity that hears appeals of people's actions. And I'll go into a little bit of detail about Kitsap County's war-torn history. So GMA has some very core concepts. These aren't all of them, but these are some of the main ones, is that unincorporated areas like counties should have three types of land: urban, rural, and resource. Urban lands are growth focused. You should have dense housing, shopping, jobs, sidewalks, multimodal transportation options. That is where your future growth is supposed to be targeted. Then you have your rural area. I guess for urban areas, again, I'm talking about the cities, but also I'm talking about the unincorporated area of Silverdale. I'm talking about unincorporated Kingston. And I also am talking about the unincorporated Central Kitsap UGA. I'll talk a little more about what that UGA looks like. And then rural areas. They're intended to be protected from growth. We are not supposed to be promoting people move to Seabeck, Hansville, all these other places. And we are supposed to try to limit the number of people that can move to those areas, because rural areas are supposed to have, again, larger properties, only rural jobs, very limited commercial, intended to be sized for that rural area. And then we have resource lands. These are lands such as timber, commercial agriculture, not small agriculture like we see, but full commercial agriculture like you'd see in the Skagit Valley, like you'd see in other portions of Pierce and Snohomish counties. And then, of course, mining. Mining in particular is one of those that you don't really have much choice. The ore or the material is located in a particular place thanks to the glaciers, and that really is something that we need to protect over time. Urban services like sewer, sidewalks, multifamily housing are intended to be limited to urban growth areas. So again, urban areas like Kingston, Silverdale, the Central Kitsap UGA, and of course the cities. Urban services are generally prohibited in rural areas. So sewer lines are not supposed to go into the rural areas unless, there's one unless, there is a documented environmental health hazard, that there is something that is detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare, then you can run sewer out there. Let me pause there and see if there's any questions again about kind of the GMA's main goals for local jurisdictions.
No hands up in the room. Anybody on Zoom have a question at this point? We have a question in the room.
My name is Earl Burt, and for urban growth, for houses, dense houses, and shopping jobs, is there a program for solar power and for the charging stations for electric vehicles? Off the wall question, but that focus, growth focus.
At this point, we are currently discussing what we call electric vehicle code. It's actually running right now. We are taking public comments on it, but that would require electric vehicle charging in almost all multifamily, commercial, and employment development. Not necessarily single family as of yet. So single family detached, duplexes, and triplexes, anything with its own garage would not fall into this. But yes, we are currently looking to impose code that requires charging stations to be located in these high intensity uses, again, multifamily, commercial, and industrial, and other employment uses. Single family residential has to have what we call EV ready, which basically means it's in the ground in the street, but does not necessarily need to yet turn into a charging station. The market is kind of trending this way anyway, and the State Building Code Council is also weighing in heavily. This is, again, a statewide endeavor, but Kitsap County is looking to adopt a code hopefully by the end of this year.
Thank you.
Another question from Janice.
Could you go over the issue of a sewer system in a rural area again? I didn't quite follow what you said about that.
Oh. Not a problem. Sewer in particular is supposed to be prohibited in rural areas. There is a exemption, and that's for what we call here. I'm going to use planner speak here, and I apologize. Limited areas of more intensive rural development. Those are places like Manchester and Suquamish and Keyport. These are places that have their own sewer systems. They are allowed to have sewer, but if, let's say, you wanted to have sewer down Chico Way outside of the urban growth area, you would not be able to extend that sewer, and homes would not be able to connect to it unless there is an environmental health hazard, like your drain field is failing, it is leaching into either a stream or the shoreline, and there's no other way to address that other than with sewer.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And just to clarify, I do have until 11:30, or however long you want to have me, I can speed along.
Well, just as long as it takes to cover the materials, so.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, yeah, I don't think you guys have seen exactly how long-winded I can be, but we'll go from there. Okay, so Kitsaps GMA history. Anybody who has participated in comprehensive planning for a certain amount of time can understand that after the Growth Management Act was approved in 1990, Kitsap County struggled to find a comprehensive plan that met GMA's requirements, largely because our historic development patterns did not fit the growth management concepts. We had many small lots in the rural areas that were less than 5 acres in size. Many on the shorelines, we have third-acre lots. We have a lot of rural planned unit development, so like actual housing developments out in the rural area. And again, even the rural lots are like 2.5-acre lots or 1-acre lots. That is what was coined sprawl, but it was our historic development pattern, and our community members were very, very attached to it as part of their quality of life. Part of the reason why they moved here is for the larger lots. We had lower density in our urban areas. We didn't necessarily extend sewer all over our urban growth areas. We allowed people to do individual septic systems on 1/3-acre and 1/2-acre lots. Again, the community is very wedded to that development pattern. Growth management indicated that, again, those two things, smaller rural lots and bigger urban lots that don't have sewer, were bad, that they were not consistent with GMA. We also heavily subdivided our shorelines. We didn't really designate resource lands. So we had a number of issues. So we attempted to adopt a plan in 1994, and it was challenged and overturned. We then attempted one in 1996, and it was challenged and it was overturned. It wasn't until 1998 that we actually had a complete, valid, comprehensive plan. So again, if you go through growth management hearings board cases, you'll see Kitsap County pretty regularly, and that is unfortunate. So today in Kitsap, our urban areas are generally 5 homes per acre minimum. So again, new development has to develop five units minimum on their lots in regards to density. So that's 5 homes per acre. Depending on the zone, that can go all the way up to 30 homes per acre. But generally, unless you are around critical areas, cannot go below 5 homes per acre. Rural areas are broken up, other than those limited areas of more intensive rural development, Manchester, Suquamish, Keyport. You have rural areas are larger lots, 5, 10, and 20-acre property sizes. So again, that is the zoning that is intended to limit additional subdivision in our rural areas, and the urban regulations are intended to intensify urban development. And then our resource lands. We have long-term timberlands that's located on Green Mountain, generally land owned by the Department of Natural Resources. We do have small-scale agriculture, but no commercial agriculture, so we have no agriculture zoning. And then we have mining zoning that is pretty much located around where we have Department of Natural Resource permits for aggregate or sand extraction or something like that. So Kitsap, along with GMA, there's 2 other regional plans that are kind of over the top of the comprehensive plan that we need to be consistent with. We need to meet GMA, but we need to maintain consistency with both Vision 2050, which is the Puget Sound Regional Council's regional plan for Pierce, Snohomish, King, and Kitsap counties. And then there is the countywide planning policies, which is, again, one layer down, where the county and its cities plan together for growth. And both of these entities are very important for the distribution of federal transportation funding. Kitsap County has a lot of needs that are not necessarily growth dependent. However, it is very important that we have access to these federal funds to address those existing needs as well as deal with the needs of growth coming to our communities. To that end, Vision 2050 in particular, and then also the countywide planning policies, establish population and employment targets. So these are targets, not projections. They are actually looking at, as they call it, bending the trend. So again, they're looking for certain land use intensities in area that have transit. So the ferry service in Kingston, the ferry service in Bremerton, Port Orchard, those types of places are supposed to have a significant amount of density, and a certain amount of population and employment are being directed to those areas more so than in the past. That will have an impact on how we go forward and plan into the future. Let me pause there, as I know I said a number of things, including words like population and employment targets, that might generate questions.
Any questions in the room?
So, Eric, can the targets are, well, based on what? Because obviously you're looking at past growth and Vision 2050, the regional council, so past growth and projected growth, and then targets are how are those different from guesses or informed ideas of what to expect?
Generally, when you're talking about estimates, you really are looking at past performance. It's like, how has Kitsap been growing? Well, unfortunately, if you look back in Kitsap far enough, you're going to see anti-GMA growth patterns. So we've been a lot better since 1998, and we have been growing faster. We're getting better. I view it as a really big ship that we're trying to turn. However, the Vision 2050 and the Puget Sound Regional Council, which again, Kitsap County and its cities participated in, is very interested in focusing growth, not just in any urban area, but urban areas that are connected to high capacity transit. So that could be a bus system, that could be a ferry system. And they're very interested in concentrating growth at a higher level than certain jurisdictions have ever seen before. So again, Kingston is looking at a higher growth rate in the Vision 2050 than we've seen in the past. So targets are usually, this is what I want to see happen. It may not necessarily be what you saw in the past. And those have an impact both on population and employment as we're doing our plan.
Thank you.
Janice has a question.
I was curious about how you define commercial agriculture. We don't have that in the county. How's that defined?
Generally, commercial agriculture is several hundred, if not multiple thousands of acres of agricultural lands all located in one area. So again, all these folks, and these are folks that are generating substantial amounts of revenue off of agriculture. We do have the agricultural open space exemption that does allow people to pay less property taxes if you sell a certain amount of agricultural product. To do commercial agriculture, it's like 10, 20 times that amount. So again, you get a little closer to it in places like Big Valley and Olalla Valley, but it is not the sweeping farming that you see in Skagit County with the revenue generation that usually falls into the commercial farming category.
Thank you.
All right, moving along.
Oh, there, Earl has a question. Sorry.
Thank you again. This is kind of a two-part question. One part is the infrastructure bill that was just passed by Congress about a year ago. Those funds are there. As Kitsap County started to look at infrastructure and obtaining those funds for infrastructure, processes in the county. That's the first question. Second question is, let's go with that one first.
The answer to that question is, yeah, Kitsap County has been very involved in those conversations. At this time, we're not certain exactly how much, if any, of the infrastructure funding is going to come directly to a local jurisdiction. Like I mentioned when we were talking about Vision 2050 and the countywide planning policies, those are our avenues to get to what are called surface transportation funding from the federal government. And transit gets a lot of their money through that as well. So generally what we're expecting, we don't know this for certain, is that a lot of the money is going to go to the state to do state projects. And any money that's going to be made available to the local jurisdictions is going to go through the Puget Sound Regional Council or through the Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council, and then distributed in certain competitive processes, but also I believe certain jurisdictions may get a certain amount. That has not been determined as of yet, but yes, you should expect that Kitsap County is going to be seeing some funding from this. But I do believe that the state is going to get a very large share of that funding.
Thank you. The second question, and it has to do with regional planning. The question I have is using not solar, but windmills, and having a strategically placed in the county or in the waters associated with the county. Is that part of the regional plan?
Generally, electrical generation is handled by the private energy companies. I do know that they have looked at windmill opportunities in some of our highest areas. I don't know too much about their location in our marine environment. I probably will hazard a guess that that is going to carry with it a pretty large environmental impact statement and would have to do some substantial generation, and then also has a navigation component to it, as we do have some open waters, but we also have some navigable straits. I do know that the Puget Sound Energy has been looking at a number of different opportunities. Windmills is one of them, but I have not heard anything that indicate that they would be penciling out in the near future.
Thank you.
And I have a question regarding the development of tidal action types of energy production. Has that been investigated in Kitsap County? We have our biggest resources, obviously, the water. And I was wondering if any ideas have come up or any thoughts on that process of trying to capture some of the energy from the tides.
Not that I am aware of. I know that that is, again, another thing that Puget Sound Energy has looked at. I do believe that some of that energy production is still in, I won't call it infancy, but it's probably moving early adolescence. So I think that we're going to have to see some of these put in place in places without endangered habitat, because I think there is a concern about the habitat impacts of that. And again, because we don't have an open water body, we have a number of sometimes relatively confined channels. I think there's some navigation and, again, the habitat components. I know that it's being discussed, but I don't see it as a near-term opportunity.
Thank you.
All right, so cruising along. So basically, what's in a comprehensive plan? Just like with any plan, we have a mission and a vision. And the mission and vision is pretty broad. We want the comprehensive plan in many ways is an aspirational document. What do we want to be? So we want to strive for a number of things, and our mission and vision kind of helps get us to that point. And then the comprehensive plan includes a number of chapters. I kind of showed you the goals and policies, and these chapters are largely intended to get at most of those. The first is the land use chapter. That really is the zoning and urban growth area maps. So for a lot of folks, impact really kind of focuses on that. What is my neighborhood going to look like? What can a developer do in my neighborhood, and what could that look like? We then have economic development, which is where are people going to work in our community? The environment. With these people coming, how are we going to ensure that wetlands, streams, and our shorelines are all protected? Transportation. How are we going to ensure that these people are going to be able to get from their homes to their jobs? How are we going to ensure that congestion remains at a particular level and not too heavy? And then how are we going to handle safety as well as non-motorized opportunities like biking and pedestrian? Parks. Kitsap County has doubled its park ownership in the last 10 years. We have substantial amounts of open space, but still, we need to ensure that we're providing those types of opportunities, both in our rural areas as well as in our urban areas where appropriate. Capital facilities, that's where sewer, water, all the things that are necessary to get water out of your tap, to flush toilets. It also includes public buildings like schools, fire stations, police stations, etc. Housing and Human Services, we are going to have an emphasis on housing, as obviously we're having a housing affordability crisis. We also have an affordable housing crisis. That's different. But we're also having a housing affordability crisis, which is across all income levels. And then lastly, certain areas have their own sub-area or neighborhood plans. Again, Manchester, Suquamish, Silverdale, Illahee, they all have specific plans that create additional goals and policies for their areas and their areas only. So I think one of the questions that the League of Women Voters had was about the Central Kitsap urban growth area and the Silverdale urban growth area. While this may not be the perfect time to talk about it, the map you see there on the right is the Central Kitsap urban growth area. Can everybody see my cursor? So in general, what we're looking at is the Central Kitsap urban growth area is an unassociated UGA. It's not associated to Bremerton, which means that it's not yet intended to be annexed by the city of Bremerton over time. However, it does run from Rydell Road all the way up to, this is Barker Creek here, so it runs up to Wagga Way. So this is the highway going down, there's Walmart, like you got Fred Meyer and Lowe's located down through here. This is the fairgrounds. So this is an urban growth area that also includes the Illahee community. So that is all in there. It's an unassociated UGA. And like I indicated, the growth, the Puget Sound Regional Council targeted growth to not all UGAs, not all urban areas equally. Kingston and Silverdale are supposed to get a lot. Because this area is not associated and there is no near-term annexation plan, this urban growth area was given a substantially lower population target, which means that we need less urban area to accommodate that number, while we may need more urban area in places like Silverdale and Kingston. So the land use chapter pretty much covers how big our urban growth areas need to be, what our rural zoning looks like, and then going back to resource lands. Where is timber and where is mineral resource in all this? And then we need to accommodate that growth over a 20-year period. That's people and jobs. Where and how are they going to be located? Let me pause there and see if there's any questions.
Kathleen has a question.
Is that Kathleen Gallagher?
Oh, no. In the
Okay.
room, Kathleen Cahoff.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for doing such a great overview. And I did work for the city of Bremerton for a long time in the utilities. And I never understood why the Central Kitsap area was not associated with Bremerton. Bremerton is the largest city in Kitsap County. We have a full service city with utilities. Why, what is the reason why the Central Kitsap area is not associated with Bremerton?
Well, historically, it has been that the county provides a substantial amount of the services in this area. Additionally, we have been kind of struggling with annexation as a whole. But I do expect that the incorporation or the potential association of this UGA will be a big conversation in 2024. I also will put out there that there is historic apprehension in the CK UGA about future annexation to any city. I think that goes back to the East High, West High days, which again, even is a little bit before my time. So I think there is, again, the county and city need to kind of come together to talk to those folks about what association means, what annexation means, and how the city of Bremerton can potentially provide better levels of service over time. When we're talking about annexation and incorporation, the county's main interest in that is to ensure that it is logical and coordinated annexation, so that the boundaries are understandable to the public. They don't confound service provision, so we don't have areas where the county's maintaining this section of the road and the city's doing this section of the road. And with annexation law, that is a substantial challenge, as there's not a lot of avenues outside of a interlocal agreement method that is brand new for the city and county to decide exactly what the UGA, what the annexation boundaries are going to look like. Generally, due to annexation law, ultimately the people who are being annexed have an opportunity to undo an annexation if they don't like how it's being designed, or a wide variety of things. But expect it to come.
Kathleen, sorry. Kathleen Gallagher?
Okay, if I'm not sure if this is where I should inject my question, but I will anyway. I live on Randall Way,
Mhm.
and I live in housing for 55 and above. And down the street, there are other places like this in different configurations.
Mhm.
And I understand one of the good things for us, because we're all older, is having the urban atmosphere right across the street. We can go right across the street and shop if we have to. So that's all nice. But a lot of the people in this building are using, excuse me, walkers, wheelchairs, and slow walking. I mean, if you haven't seen old people walking, we can walk slow. And then there's health things. We're supposed to keep walking. There are sidewalks, but it's kind of like there's no fun goal which a park would offer us. And I mean a small neighborhood park. And there is a mention of neighborhoods in your plan. I tried to get familiar with it as I could in one day. And each neighborhood is different. And so I'm only speaking up for mine, but there is a mention of neighborhood types. We are older, slower, and we would love a place to go where the goal is not to spend money, although we respect that. Am I making myself clear, or am I going in circles?
No, you're basically asking how does Kitsap County look at providing community parks? And I will say historically, we had some community parks over time. A lot of Kitsap County's focus has now been on the large regional parks. We focus on places like the Clear Creek Trail, the Illahee Regional Forest, the Illahee Heritage Park, Banner Forest. A lot of that is due to the fact that counties are funded in a manner that are supposed to be focusing on rural and regional services. Kitsap County has some of the most urban land of any county, and we have struggled with that, especially in the parks system, as the same funding that funds parks is the same funding that funds the sheriff, the jail, the prosecutor, etc. And you do any kind of community poll, parks is a pretty high priority, but you can pretty much guarantee what is a higher priority on top of that. That's law and justice. And then under that, you get transportation. And then lastly, and after that, you kind of get to parks. So Kitsap is kind of wrestling with exactly how to provide small community parks, because our parks department is relatively small and is historically underfunded. So that may lead to conversations about a metropolitan park district, maybe countywide. Kingston has one right now. It would give us the opportunity to kind of break funding away that is only focused on parks, so that a parks department can focus very clearly on how to provide services. And then, of course, in Silverdale, we have the long-standing will they or won't they incorporate. So it comes down to exactly what is the county's long-term role. So yes, go from there.
A second part is I walk all the time, slower and slower. I love the large parks, but I have to drive to them. And the people on this street don't necessarily get to drive anywhere.
Yeah.
And and then in my walking, there's sidewalks, but they're not necessarily all connected. And there are places for wheelchairs to go down, but there's also places where there are no places for them to go down, or they're in an awkward place, like going out into traffic.
Yeah.
And as you walk along in all these places, and I walk a lot, there is trash everywhere, but no trash cans. Excuse me a minute. And there is no drinking fountains, and there is very few benches. And those things are all needed for a wide variety of people who use the sidewalks. And it's getting trashier and trashier. I was thinking of doing some photographs of it to show how awful it's getting. And I know part of that is homelessness, but there's no trash cans, there's no water fountains, there's no benches. And I hope my fellow leaguers are not getting tired of me saying all this. Anyway, and I see all of that, and plus a destination park for people who don't have cars, and that consider this special group of people all the way down Randall Way. And I guess that's everything I have to say.
Okay, well, while we're on that, I'm going to skip ahead here to Silverdale. So this is the Silverdale urban growth area, and mainly the downtown area. Can everybody see the image? Basically, you've got the school property located through here, the Kitsap Mall. I believe the area that you live in is right up here. Oh wait.
Yes.
Yeah,
think-
you live right up in this area. This is Randall.
Yes.
Kitsap is going to be putting a lot of effort into incentives to hopefully get additional housing in the downtown area. What you note from this image is you note a substantial amount of open parking area. That there are a certain number of buildings, but there's a lot of land in the developed space that is not being utilized to its best abilities. Obviously, retail has a component in here, and parking is driven by the retail. But as we also know, retail is changing over time. And most of these parking lots were developed in size for the 2 weeks out of the year that people would shop around Christmas. That doesn't happen that much anymore. And there's a lot of opportunity for redevelopment here. In that redevelopment, Kitsap County would really like to see downtown Silverdale turn into a community where we have more vertical housing that provides additional housing opportunities, that also has the opportunity for this to be a 24/7 destination. Not people coming in at 10 in the morning and leaving around 7. And then maybe there's a smattering of restaurants. That is challenging for commercial businesses, especially restaurants and service providers, not having people living downtown. COVID showed us that, as some of our retail and our restaurants took a big hit because people were not driving into Silverdale anymore to shop. So one of the key focuses on how do we incentivize that type of development, how do we remove obstacles to higher rise housing. So you're going to be seeing a lot of updates to the Silverdale Regional Centers Plan to hopefully, again, incentivize that. And hopefully that will also help us with some of our housing issues, which I'll cover here in a moment, though I am quickly running out of time. Questions about the Silverdale area? All right. I'm going to scroll back up here a little bit. I mentioned population and employment targets for the next 20 years. I kind of want to show you what that looks like for each community. Like I indicated, there are targets for varying jurisdictions. Bremerton is our metropolitan city, so it is intended to take the most. Thus, you're looking at almost a 50% increase for them over time, but still 20,000 people. That's more than double than any other jurisdiction is looking to take over that period of time. The Silverdale area is looking at about 10,000 people coming, but now you go down here into the other high capacity transit communities and you see Port Orchard looking to take 10,000 people. So you're looking at, a really large amount of growth, which Port Orchard's already been seen. That is largely because there are so many projects that are in the pipeline right now. So Port Orchard is growing at an incredible rate and is an urban area and has ferry access to downtown. So what you're looking at here is generally, if I go back a slide, about 70,000, almost 71,000 new residents and about 46,000 new jobs coming into the county over the next 20 years. That is a substantial amount. So this creates a math problem for planners. We have the number of people who are coming. We generally know where they are targeted to go. We now need to go through and figure out exactly how many people can we fit in our existing urban areas And based on that number of people that were fitting inside, do we need to upzone particular areas, take areas that might have been for single family housing and make it multifamily housing? Or do we need to expand the urban growth area so areas that were rural then become urban and allow some other additional housing? That is kind of the math problem that no planner ever went to school to do. It involves a lot of Excel spreadsheets. It involves something called the land capacity analysis, which again is a long methodology and with a set of assumptions that basically says X amount of land with critical areas and public facilities needs can hold Y number of people, and that Y number of people needs to equal the number of people that you're planning for that area. And ultimately, that is what the county is going to have to wrestle with. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about housing affordability. That is one of the challenges that we currently have, as I think we all note that housing is getting, earlier this year, it is kind of plateaued, with quickly getting out of the range of affordability for a vast majority of our, let's just say a majority of our residents. That though the costs of that were really affecting home ownership, but also is affecting rentals, where people are unable to find certain types of housing and certain types of housing at certain price points. Our housing is very single family detached home oriented. We have more single family detached housing than any of our other central Puget Sound counterparts. That single family detached housing is one of the most expensive forms of housing, and the one that has grown in cost the fastest. Also, a number of these homes in Kitsap County have more bedrooms than they have occupants. So we also have detached housing that is larger than the necessary needs of a household. And the larger the house, the more expensive it is. The more expensive it is, the harder it is for certain income brackets to afford it. Housing is not going to get cheaper. Our housing affordability issue is not one thing. When you talk about housing affordability in the community, you're usually going to hear one of two things. You're going to hear that developers are greedy, and that's why why everything's so expensive, or that regulation and materials and everything else is going up so high that's why housing is affordable. The answer to a degree is a little bit of everything. Regulation, that's me. I'm not all the problem, but as we add regulations and as we add costs onto housing, it does increase the cost, the ultimate cost of housing. Land, if land goes up in price for a whole host of reasons, that affects housing. And then, of course, there is the profit point. Ultimately, we need somebody who is willing to build the housing. The idea that if you don't build it, they won't come that's not reality. They will come, they will find a place to live, and they will affect the price point of housing in a way that grossly impacts your community. One statement that I make in a lot of different places is that we spend a lot of time planning for the built environment, houses, roadways, sewer lines, and the natural environment, wetlands, forests, all of that. But there's a third component that's equally as important for our community, and that's the human environment. The people who live here, the people who have historically lived here, the older couple that lives down the street, the new young couple who comes in with 3 kids who work at Dick's Sporting Goods. Those folks all make up the fabric of the community. So as property values go up, you're going to find a number of those individuals who are not able to live in our community any longer, and we are going to lose that. That is just as important not to lose as trees in the natural environment and the built structures. So I kind of lay that out there as one other thing to think about, and it makes everything more complicated. The state of Washington passed a bill about a year ago that requires jurisdictions not just to look at housing types anymore, but to look at housing, at exactly how much housing costs, both rentals and homes, and to ensure we're providing housing opportunities for people who are making 30, 50, and 80% of annual median income. For Kitsap County, 100% annual median income, I think, is somewhere around just under $100,000. So basically, people are making 50% of that's around $56,000. As you know from your neighborhoods right now, if you ever looked at one of the housing things, there's not a lot of housing out there. And when you look at the rentals, there's not a lot of rentals out there to rent, period. And certainly not at the price points that somebody making $50,000 a year could afford. If you utilize the standard, don't spend more than 30% of your income on housing. That also requires us to focus more on supportive housing. Obviously, 30% of AMI needs to be publicly funded housing. That is a amount per rent or ownership that needs a certain amount of public support. We also need public services and homeless shelters. Kitsap County is currently developing one down on Mile Hill Drive to provide around 75 to 100 beds. That is only a small amount of the need. And we need to be continuing to plan for those types of aspects. Let me pause there and see if there's any questions about housing affordability and the population and employment stuff I just talked about.
In chat, Diane had a couple of questions. Did you want to ask them, Diane, or do you want me to read? Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
One of the frustrations I had in 2008 when I moved to Kitsap County, and it's not uncommon to Kitsap, it's all over the place, is trying to find a single family home that is actually accessible for a wheelchair. And nobody seems to be taking that issue and trying to make the system, not just people's homes, but the entire system to be more accessible, so you can actually go to your neighbor's house, or you can go down the street and you don't have to get in the car, you don't have to call somebody. So what sort of incentives could be put in place, not as mandate, but incentives, so that builders want to make accessible homes? 2 and 3 steps are a problem for people who use wheelchairs. So that's my question.
I think largely the market is coming to that conclusion in a lot of ways. One of the ways is to ensure that we have land that is easier to develop. We have a lot of hills in Kitsap County, and when you're building a housing development, you're talking about multiple tiers. I think that ends up being a challenge. Honestly, the incentives that folks are looking at will come down to exactly what does the community want to see most, because our options for incentives are somewhat limited. The development community is largely looking for speedier processing of their permits. They're looking for fees and regulatory requirements that are as minimal as possible, because those ultimately add costs. You are correct. It is very, very challenging to find a single story rambler, especially as we talk about density. 6 to 9 dwelling units an acre. Generally, you are now seeing at least 2-story homes, if not higher than that, which of course now requires stairs, not just the 3 to get into your house, but more than that. So the challenge is going to be how to be able to provide those types of uses. And if we are going to develop continue to develop multi-story construction, how do we get the master bedroom on the main floor? How do we get the laundry facilities all on the main floor, so that as people age, they have the opportunity to be able to still live in the home? Yeah, they aren't utilizing the 2 bedrooms up top anymore, but they can still move forward. Incentives generally come into, again, streamlining of permitting, as well as providing financial incentives, either reductions in property taxes, which usually is focused on multifamily housing only, or again, reductions in fees. Of course, when you reduce fees, that money has to come from somewhere. You raise a very strong challenge. I do believe that the market is moving in that direction, but Kitsap County has a very strong history of single-family detached housing, and a whole lot of split level or multi-level homes that does not get to exactly what you're looking for. So I wish I had a clearer answer, but it will be a component of discussion. And we're really hoping that the public brings it up very often, because it isn't just about different housing types and housing costs. It is amenities for people to be able to age in place.
Well, one example that I think the government could play a leading role in is my former home in Polsbo had a low-income housing project, a sweat equity neighborhood built. And that all by itself through Housing Kitsap could have had mandates in it that it be accessible. So you'd end up with 40 homes in our neighborhood alone that would be accessible. So that's an avenue that government has much more control over some of the policy issues that makes it logical to me to at least increase the amount of homes out there that are accessible for people.
Yeah, you had originally asked about incentives, which again is the carrot component. You're now describing the regulatory, and you're right. There is opportunities to do that in all housing, not just affordable housing. So yeah, I think that is something that will be discussed to ensure that it is easier for people to be able to at least get into their homes. What they do inside of them might be an entirely different conversation.
Thank you.
This is Sue Hughes. I have a question.
Yes.
Am I muted or?
Oh, we can hear you.
You can hear me now? Good. Eric, I can't recall the formal name for freestanding units that people could build on their lots. If the lot is a third of an acre or more, maybe. They would be called, mother-in-law units or what have you, but they would perhaps help ease some of the homelessness problem.
I think the term
Housing, and I don't know the rules or the building codes or what have you, governing building these units, and if that is being considered for easing up on some of the requirements.
What you're talking about is accessory dwelling units or accessory living quarters. The difference being accessory living quarters are inside the main residence. Accessory dwelling units are standalone, oftentimes over the top of a garage.
I'm talking standalone. Yeah.
So if you're talking a standalone, we are looking to streamline the process on that to encourage those types of things in existing developments. Along with that, we're also looking to encourage different housing types, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. On top of that, we're also trying to work with the state to make condominium law cheaper and easier to utilize, because multifamily housing, fourplexes and triplexes tend to be hard to get as a home ownership model. And rentals, of course, have a place everywhere. But when we're pushing a housing type that it's really, really hard to have a home ownership component to, you end up focusing just solely on rentals. So we are looking to streamline and incentivize those types of things, again, by making it easier to develop those. Some of the hard parts are going for some 30-acre lots is you have that drain field back there. It's like, I have an open spot to put one of these. Yeah, but your drain field is on there. And if your drain field isn't, your reserve drain field is on there. So it is all going to be site dependent, but the county is going to be looking to find ways to make those more interesting to folks to, again, utilize for kids moving out of the house, but not too far out of the house, and aging parents who need care and are looking to move closer to.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. This is Robin. You're talking of 46,000 jobs coming into the county and additional 70,000 people. Do you have a projection as to what those jobs are going to be and how these people are going to be able to find housing, number one, and number two, what about our schools? Are they going to be equipped to handle the population increase? Because I know we're already having issues with passing levies and whatnot for school buildings. So where are we going to stand in that regard?
That will all be part of the comprehensive plan. Basically, what you're describing there is the capital facilities plan, which does include school sizing. So from the economic development, we are obviously looking to focus on family wage jobs where possible. Obviously in Kitsap County, the Navy is going to continue to be a location for a lot of these jobs. If it isn't directly Navy, it's going to be civilian workforce related to the Navy. And if it's not the civilian workforce directly working for the Navy, it's going to be probably jobs that are spun off from that. So I expect that to be a large component. I think we are also looking at areas in tourism, as well as how do we address the growing nature of work from home. Historically, we've only considered employment in the brick and mortar version, which is, okay, you have a building. That building has 18 workers, everyone's working in the building. That's not the case anymore. Now you may have 2 people working in the building and 16 people working out in your community. So how do we factor in that level of employment? Or how do we factor in folks who are working in Microsoft and Google? That's employment in our community. Those are people who are working here. So in general, from an employment standpoint, I think the Navy will always have a strong focus. And then onto your school question, each of the special purpose districts, ports, school districts, fire districts have to plan for those folks coming forward. That may include levies, that may include capital bonds. It is one of those things that is a challenge to pass, especially in the post-COVID nature. But we are going to have to find a way also for the new development to fund those. We already have we have parks impact fees, we have road impact fees, and we have school impact fees. I believe the CK School District is drastically looking to increase their school impact fees based upon the statement you just made. And so much of the development is occurring in a portion of their district that does not necessarily have school capacity. So I think it's going to be a number of different funding sources, but all of that has to be mapped out by 2024 so that folks know how the various services are going to be provided if we're going to be taking on this many people.
Thank you.
As I am up against my 11:30 timeline, I think I may just skip down here to you folks submitted a set of questions. I think I've answered some of those questions in this presentation. I did skip over a number of slides, but first I'm going to kind of pump through some of the ones I knew that you guys wanted to hear about, and then we can take some additional questions. What's the Planning Commission's role? Kitsap County has a 9-member Planning Commission, 3 members from each district. They are responsible for reviewing proposals brought to them by the Department of Community Development to ultimately be considered by the Board of County Commissioners. They don't necessarily create issues to analyze. They are pretty much there to provide feedback on proposals. Like I mentioned earlier, the electric vehicle code is going before the Planning Commission for them to make recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. They are an advisory body, and they do have the ability to provide advice to the board. The board oftentimes takes that advice really strongly, but does not have to. The board maintains autonomy to make decisions on their own. The department directors, Parks Department, Community Development Director, Public Works Directors, all are actively involved in the comprehensive plan. They are working on their goals and policies. They are working on the capital facilities impacts to ensure that we are providing the necessary facilities for growth. So they're involved with me way more than they want to be involved with me. So again, they're on from the ground up. Tribal coordination. We are meeting every other week with all of the affected tribes. That isn't just Suquamish and Port Gamble S'Klallam. That is the Jamestown S'Klallam. That is Squaxin. That is Puyallup. Anybody who has a UNA in our county is invited to this meeting. That is a meeting that is a two-way street. One, it is for tribes to bring questions and concerns to county staff, and for the county staff to present where we are in this. So again, we are meeting every other week with them, and at certain times, presentations may actually go up to their tribal councils, but that would be up to the tribes as to when they feel their tribal councils want to hear from people such as me on topics that are particularly important to the tribes. There was a question about the assessment of the 2016 planning efforts. We are currently doing a gap analysis on exactly how our 2016 comprehensive plan has worked thus far and ways that our 2016 plan may be deficient based upon Vision 2050's goals, as well as the countywide planning policies goals. That is one of the first things we need to do to determine exactly what areas we need to focus on, as well as other areas of interest to the public. One of the things I didn't spend a lot of time on is climate change. Climate change is another large initiative that we are going to be talking about. That includes sea level rise, that includes greenhouse gas emission reductions, that also addresses wildfire risk. We're going to have to address how are we going to improve regulations related to that. But again, we have to take a look at those regulations as it impacts other goals, such as providing housing affordability and affordable housing options. So there's all this delicate balance on bringing important community things forward while not creating unintended consequences that affect another component of the plan. So it is this weird Chinese puzzle, or I would just call it puzzle because I think I confuse people sometimes, that you're constantly moving things around and ultimately the image becomes clear, but it can be a long process to get there. And then I think I talked about the Central Kitsap urban growth area implications. We do need to talk about the future of that, and we need to make sure that we roll the public into that conversation, as ultimately they will be the ones that have that responsibility. So let me pause there and see if I answered those questions to the level that the group was looking for, and then did I miss any that was sent to me previously?
We have a question from Kathleen in the room.
I was curious what assumptions being used for the number of people per household.
We are currently analyzing that and maybe updating it. Single family residences are historically 2.5 people per household. Multifamily is 1.8 people per household. Both of those are going to be reviewed based upon new data. I think we can possibly see that some of our households are shrinking in size in certain ways, but we do need to make sure that we try to maintain a kind of consistency across the county on that, and we don't try to do it by community. As the smaller your data source gets, the more possibility for error.
Pat Troxel has her hand raised.
Yes, I do. I have a question regarding the healthcare system, public health, and also our one and only hospital in Kitsap County and its current inadequacies. What can be done? How do we plan for? It's a private entity, so I guess the county can't say anything other than if they're backing up traffic in the with the ambulances not being able to get in all the time. But what can be done for Kitsap County to improve our public health and private hospitals?
Well, you are definitely correct. The county does not have a clear role in this, though the county has been advocating very strongly at the state level and federal level for assistance in this current problem. One of the options to provide greater, I guess, options for a healthcare service is a hospital district. Certain rural communities have these types of things, which is a taxing authority that does provide funding for additional medical opportunities. That requires a substantial amount of upfront work to find out exactly what type of services are necessary, how expensive would that be, and can a public entity adequately provide those at a particular funding level. I think it is a continued discussion that we're going to have. Though the county's comprehensive plan doesn't really speak to the hospital section as much, but I sense if Franciscan continues to have challenges, and it is our only opportunity, though we do have St. Anthony's that is down just south of the border. Most of the commentary I hear on this basically focuses on Tacoma and Seattle as the only other options. That being said, that still is not centrally located to Kitsap, and other opportunities are going to be necessary. But I would say if you're looking for the clearest path forward, I would look into the hospital district and exactly what that takes to create and what kind of avenue that might provide to improve selection in our community.
Thank you.
I will allow you to cut me off whenever, but you have me as long as you want me.
I have a quick question. I was just curious if you have a sense of Kitsap County's percentage of, projected percentage of population growth compared to the other 3 counties in the Puget Sound area that in the PSRC, the Puget PRSC, I guess. Are we in line with growth in the other Puget Sound areas, or are we more or less?
We are less. Of the total regional population and employment, we are accommodating 5% of that from the 4-county region. So again, King County is taking the most. I think Snohomish is second, Pierce is third, and we are substantially the least. So we are taking more growth than we have historically, but we've also seen more growth in the last 10 years. And I think that is due to some of the issues on the other side of the water. But it's something that can't necessarily be easily, we can't block it off. So roughly about 5% of the regional amount between now and 2050. So we are taking less than the other jurisdictions by far.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Katie, and I meant to email you this question ahead of time, so it's probably more complicated than you can handle just quickly over Zoom call. Given the
Challenge.
growth that's anticipated and the specific areas that are being focused for increased population, how is the county one, assessing historic development patterns, and then balancing historic preservation and archaeological resources as one of those goals within the Growth Management Act? I know the 2016 plan has hardly any mention of archaeology or historic preservation. How is the county looking to think through those efforts for the 2024 plan that you guys are working on currently?
Obviously, with the cultural resources, we work very, very closely with the local tribes. Any kind of land use permit requires notification of the tribes for any type of culturally sensitive information. They have maps as to where their culturally sensitive areas are, though they generally do not share those for concern that they will be disrupted. So on the cultural aspect, it really requires a focus on it really requires a focus on working very closely with the tribes, which historically we have done, though I think the tribes would always like more connection and more ability to participate, and we're going to kind of work with that. When it comes to the historical aspects, most of our historical buildings, et cetera, are located within our cities. So a reason why the unincorporated comprehensive plan doesn't discuss historic quite as much is outside of Port Gamble, where there is a Port Gamble sub-area plan that has a lot of conversation about the historic components. We don't have quite as many of those types of buildings. Silverdale was largely built in the 80s. Eventually, that's going to become historic development, but not historic development the way we tend to think about it often. Kingston downtown has some historic buildings, and I think Kingston has a little bit of conversation about historic preservation, and likely we'll have more as we start talking about the redevelopment of Kingston to take on more population. But largely that's why you haven't seen the historic component. And then the cultural resources, we usually don't locate them in one chapter. We try to spread them out amongst chapters. I'd have to go back. I thought we did have some references to it, but again, it isn't usually more than a goal or policy, or a policy indicating that we will be sensitive to cultural resources. But we definitely do need to amplify that in the 2024 or 2024 update.
One question, maybe to bring it to a close is, so this process, I think in June, there was this call for people who wanted to submit recommendations or I'm not sure what, but our members are interested in activism, and some of our members might like to get involved in the process. Are there things that we can do, or is it a matter now where it's already the train's left the station, sort of?
No, trains at the station. We're still boarding.
Okay.
I had a number of slides that kind of walk through the whole process. That takes a certain amount of time. There is ongoing public participation. Right now, what we're doing is we're kind of having 30,000-foot discussions on a number of components of the plan. We have had a series of Zoom meetings and have two more coming up. They're located here on the screen. The next one will be focused on the Silverdale Regional Center, and that is this week, actually, I'm not realizing. And then we have one the following week that is covering transportation and capital facilities. We also have the individual citizens advisory committees that are working diligently on updating their individual sub-area plans, Kingston being one of the more involved. Kitsap County is willing to come and meet individually with the League of Women Voters and have meetings like this at your interest. Again, you folks are very important in getting the word out. also being a very independent and objective mediator, because there's going to be a lot of interest coming from different directions in this process. So the participation of getting the word out, as well as participating in the process from the league, is incredibly important. So if the League of Women Voters isn't already on our email and social media update system, we'd really like to have you on there, because again, anytime we schedule another meeting, anytime we have new documents that are available, I think you were referencing the reclassification request process that came out in June. Basically what that was is we asked folks, hey, are there particular areas of the county that you would like to see zoned or developed in a different way than you've seen today? If so, what are those? That is a public outreach opportunity, just so we can kind of figure out what people are thinking in general. We did close that in September, and we have a number of applications that have come in, about 85 of them. That list will be available next week, and we could easily distribute it to the League of Women Voters for them to take a look at what has been submitted so far. And as documents come out like that, we'd like to be able to share that with you, as well as when there's going to be opportunities for the community as a whole to participate. And then I do, again, one more time, want to open up the opportunity that I'm willing to come to you or someone like me to come and talk to you about individual things that are of particular interest to the league as we move through the process.
Well, that is very helpful. And our president is in charge of distribution of information to us. So we'll share your comments with her and get on your list.